I'm Ashley Vandeventi. I'm the Director of Meetings at ABSA. Kristen Kessler is our Manager of Meetings, and she's also on this call with us today. You should be able to see my screen. If not, let me know. But this is our submission site where you'll log in to do your reviews and construction. Similar, it's the same site where you did your submissions. You'll just log in with your ABSA information here. Mine has a little more information on it, but you'll have this unit planner menu here. You'll mostly be using this review submissions and panel construction link there to do your reviews. And feel free at any time to jump in with questions. I want this to be as informal as possible, or just open to conversation rather. So feel free to jump in if you have any questions. I know there's a lot of different things that I'll be clicking on and different processes that we'll be working through. So don't hesitate to jump in if you have a question or need me to slow down or go back to something. So this is what you'll see after you submit that review submissions link. Here you'll see there's a menu here that says email or email planner. If you want to email another planner, you can use that. You can construct your panels using this link. And then there's also a reports menu where you can pull reports. This next table shows you your progress you've made. Unassigned just means that nothing's been done with it. Pending and complete generally mean there's another step to be done before formally accepting and rejecting them. There's an individual submissions tab here, or row rather, a session submission row as well. So your individual submissions are your paper proposals, whereas your session submissions are those that are full panel submissions. You can see how many have been rejected and how many have been accepted here. This tab here is your individual presentations tab. This will be all the papers that have been submitted to you. And then you'll have a sessions tab here, which will show all the sessions, full sessions that have been submitted to you. We also have an incoming submissions tab. This shows you all of the proposals, which have you listed as a second choice division. So you can go through those and see if there's anything you like and might want to use. If so, you can click this email planner button and you can email the division who is currently holding that panel and ask them to send it to you. More often than not, they're willing to part with it. But this just gives you an idea of what might be coming your way soon. When they're under this incoming submissions tab, it means they haven't made a decision on it yet on their side. So those are mainly the big three tabs you'll be using. You can also search your volunteers for chairs and discussants here. So now we'll go back to the individual submission. So the first step would be to review these all based on their content. You'll see a few different things here. You'll see there is a second choice division listed, how it's submitted. Was it a paper, a poster submission? And then fields of interest. These are basically just search terms that you can attach, or tags rather, to a proposal for searching. You can view the content of the proposal here. It gives you a little more information, including the abstract, whether or not they would like to be considered for just a paper panel, poster, or in this case, they have both listed. You can also see we've asked the meeting environment preference here, and you can see that whether they want it to be in person, virtual, or either option. We'll get into that a little bit more when we do the construction phase, but that's just one spot where you can find that information. Again, the goal is to first review on quality and then look at those meeting environment preferences. You'll also see a transfer button here. You can transfer proposals if you think this might be a good fit in another division. You can transfer it to there. We'll go over how to transfer full sessions to the theme panel soon. And when we get to the sessions tab, that's going to be an upcoming deadline on Monday. If you have any sessions you would like to have considered as a theme panel. So basically, when you do your review, you'll see this link here. You'll click on that. You can include your internal notes here. If you want to leave notes for a co-chair, they can go there. You then have an option to accept or reject. because you're the first, this is a first choice division reviewing this right now, if it's rejected, it will automatically flow in the system to the second choice division, which in this case is division 2. You then have 3 options here. You can save your work and finish later. Basically, it's a partial review. If you want to come back and look at your work later, that's a good option. And then you click accept and continue. A suggested recommendation would be if you want to leave a recommendation for another reviewer, you would use, or for your chair, you would use this. And again, you could leave notes there for them. And then a complete review. This is a final decision. So if you select accept or reject here, it's either going to be accepted formally for your division and use one of your, well, in a session case, it would use an allocation. There's not an allocation for papers. Or it would reject it, and again, automatically it would go to division 2. One thing I recommend is just kind of a work process flow, is if there's any submissions you kind of feel might work later on, should you have holes in your panels, I would write those down, the title and the author. What we could do is if you reject it and then decide later you want to use it, I can search for that title and come back, and if it's not being used, I can send it back to you to use. So again, if there's just any you're on the fence about, but you end up ultimately rejecting them, just write down the title and author, and I can help you find those later. There's a few different ways here to search too. You can search by unassigned, pending, complete. Those are kind of those, there's further work, there's additional work that needs to be done in those categories: rejected, accepted, and accepted in session. One thing I'll note is the accepted and accepted in session, they're very similar. The difference being accepted in session means it's a paper that has been added to a panel. When all your work's complete on March 24, all of your papers here that have been accepted should say accepted in session. If you have any that just say accepted, that means it's not on a panel, and every paper at the end of the day should be on a panel. You can also search here by fields of interest. Those are those tags we talked about. If there's a certain topic you're looking for, this is a good place to search for that. Of course, you can search by title as well, and then what you've reviewed. So that's kind of the short summary of the individual submissions tab. I'll go through the sessions quick, and then we can take a pause and talk about any questions we have, just because I think seeing that full picture of the individual submissions and the session submissions will give you a good idea of how this process works. So this is a sessions tab. Again, these are full panel proposals that have been submitted to you. You can kind of see their status here, or you can search using these tabs. So Monday, February 22, that will be the deadline for you to elevate any panels you would like to be considered as a theme panel. The plus side of having one of your panels accepted as a theme panel is that it uses a theme panel allocation. And then we can list you as a co-sponsor. So the attendance for that theme panel also counts to you. There are only a limited number of theme panels, so there is a possibility that if it's not accepted, it will come back to you. So to transfer that to the theme panel, you would just click this transfer button, and then you would select theme panel, and then basically it would transfer that over for you. You would want to just click propose transfer and then accept and continue, and it would send it over for theme panel consideration. So here you can see we also have the meeting environment preference and this summary on the left-hand side. This means, for example, the virtual here, they want to be a virtual panel. This was submitted originally as a standard in-person panel. So in this case, if you were going to accept a virtual panel, we need to make sure that we change the type to its virtual equivalent. So it's an author meets critics panel. So we would need to change the type to a virtual author meets critic panel. This means it will take from your virtual allocation. Anything that doesn't say virtual will come from your in-person allocation and will be scheduled as an in-person panel. Anything that you make a virtual panel will be scheduled as a virtual panel. So be sure when you're doing that you just kind of make sure that you have the right type and the right environment, because the allocation will be pulling from whatever session type you've picked. And again, that's how it will be scheduled. I'm going to stop. It looks like there might be some questions in the chat. It looks like Kristen has answered them. Just to have it on the recording. Is there any flexibility to switch an in-person panel to a virtual? It is much easier for us to move in-person panels virtual at the end of the day. There's no space constraint on those. So if there is a situation in which you feel perhaps you want to forego an in-person for another virtual, let me know. What is the qualifications for a theme panel? What kinds of panels should be considered? Generally, these are high-level panels, really tied closely to this year's theme. They do receive a number of proposals. It's really up to you what you feel meets that criteria. I think it's really, there's been a wide range submitted in the past. Can we create a new panel ourselves? Yes, you can. So these individual presentations, when you accept those, these will be what you will create panels out of. It is up to you on how many sessions you would like to accept versus how many sessions you would like to create. We leave that up to the division chairs to decide how they want to do that. To create a panel, you're going to use this create a panel link. And then you would select the type of panel you would like to create. We'll do a paper panel because it's a little more complicated, and then I can go through a round table as well. So we'll do an in-person panel. And it will ask you these questions. I will say the session description does pull into the online program, so you don't need to do a lengthy description. If you don't want to include anything, you could just do a period there and that works. But just to flag that, because sometimes people put their own notes in there. Unfortunately, it does make you select the fields of interest just because that's a question that was in there from the beginning. And then it'll make you select the meeting environment preference. Again, this should match whatever meeting environment preference or whatever session type you selected. We did an in-person session type, so we want to make sure we use the in-person meeting preference just so everything lines up. Then you'll accept and continue. And automatically it will default you to a chair because every session needs to have a chair in the system. You can use yourself as a placeholder in the meantime, or if you know right away who it will be, you can just go search for the names here. You can view your volunteer chairs and discussants there. Once you've accepted papers, they will appear here. I don't believe I accepted any so far. I'm going to go back and do that right now, and we'll just quick run through this again. I have a test one in here already. So for this one, I'm going to review final decision. I'm going to check select complete review final decision because I want to accept it for sure. And as you'll notice, it now says accepted. So then I'm going to go back to create a panel. Create a panel. I'm doing an in-person one. And now I can view my accepted papers, and that paper is now here for me to add. And then I'm going to add Kristen as a discussant. And if somebody's not pulling up here, I would double check their name. You can also search by email. And if they're still not pulling up, chances are they don't have an APSA profile, and they'll need to create one, and we can provide you that link. I think we need to add 2 papers, I believe. So I'm going to add one more. Let's see if I can get by with just doing one. In general, we recommend at least 2. So here you'll see a summary of the panel you created. It's in person. You can see the papers we've added, the chair, and the discussant. If you want to add a co-sponsor, you can add them here. You can add any division, any related group or partner association. The plus side of this is, while it will use your allocation because you are creating the panel, it will also count towards the allocation attendance number for next year for anybody who's listed as a co-sponsor. So in general, because it is using your allocation, but they're benefiting from it, we do see usually a little quid pro quo or exchange of panels for sponsorship. That way both groups are investing in allocation, but both are benefiting from that cross-marketing. So then you would just add them, and then they just appear there. You can have more than one if you would like more than one. Just make sure you check with them so that they know they're listed as a co-sponsor and that they've agreed to it. and then you would just save and submit it. So I'm going to go back to questions here, and then we'll try creating a roundtable again. Can we make all of our panels virtual? So just a note on that, all related groups and partner associations, all their panels will be virtual unless we've otherwise discussed it. For divisions, you do have a set number of virtual panels and a set number of in-person panels. And we ask you to try to stay to that as close as possible because it is a 50-50 split. So, and I think our responses so far have been 50-50, so it should balance out quite well. For creating a theme panel, yes, you can. It's a little more complicated because how this is, when you create a panel, the system believes because you're creating it, you want to keep it. There is a central administrator feature where if you're creating the panel and you would like to elevate it for a theme panel, Kristen or myself, you can email meeting@appsandnet.org. We can transfer that up for you. So just let us know if there's a created panel so if you've created a panel out of some of your paper presentations and you'd like it to be considered for a theme panel, just let us know and we can do that for you. Again, unfortunately, you can't do it yourself because it's a created session and the system recognizes sessions you've created as something you'd want to keep. So we'll quick do a roundtable here just to show you what that looks like. We'll do a virtual roundtable. Just one other note on the created panels. When you go to add a paper, you will see next to the paper what the preference was in terms of environment. So just make sure that that lines up when you're adding papers to the panel. So if you're doing an in-person panel, make sure when you look at that paper that it shows that they prefer to be in person. We don't want to put somebody who had a virtual person on an in-person panel would not work. Essentially, there's no way for us to get them onto the in-person panel on site. We have a little more flexibility if it's an in-person attendee who wants to present virtually. Basically, with virtual, you can do it from anywhere. So we'll go back and we'll do a roundtable, and then I'll show you some reports which might be helpful, particularly for balancing this idea of the meeting environment preference and quality of the panel. So to create a virtual panel, you're just going to go to that create a panel link. You're going to look for a roundtable and same screen here. In fact, it's just a little bit easier because you're only adding people to it. You don't have to add any papers. So again, we want the meeting environment preference to match. And then you would just search for the people you want to add to it. So roundtables have one chair and then everybody else is a presenter. There's not a discussant on a roundtable. This is something that seems to come up every year. Discussants are considered paper panel participants. They're discussing a paper. On a roundtable, you'll have presenters. So then you could just add presenters here. You can kind of see how many roles Kristen's already on. I don't know that it matters so much right now. I would say if you see somebody who has like 50 author roles, for example, or more than like 5, there's going to be a situation in which they're going to have to turn some of those down. And then you just go through and add your presenters to it. And then you would accept and continue. You can see your summary here. And there you go, you would have it again. And so if we go to those tests under sessions, you can see that these are now created sessions. This means it's something you've created and that's counting towards your allocation. This one is a created panel, so it's an in-person panel, so it's taking 1 in-person allocation. This one's a virtual roundtable, so it's taking 1 virtual allocation. And you can view your allocations by clicking create a panel.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you started creating the virtual roundtable, one of the questions it looked like was, is this your own work? Is that just a way of trying to flag like which of the chairs is creating the roundtable?
No, I wouldn't. I would just check yes on that. That's a holdover from the submission process. It's just a set number of questions that pull over. You can just mark yes. It's just when we do the submission process, we want to be making sure they're submitting their own work. And so that's just a holdover question from that original submission. So you can just check yes there.
Thank you.
Yep. So here you'll see your allocation table. You'll see what allocation we're looking at here. So you have an individual session allocation. You don't have to worry about this. This is how many papers you're allocated. There's no limit on that. You have a panel session allocation. This is the in-person panel session allocation. You can see in this case, there's 18 and we've accepted 1. There's a poster allocation. This is the number of posters the division has. And then there's how many sessions they would create. We've divided this up based on if you have 12 poster allocations, that equals 1 session. So in this case, they have over 12, but under 24, so they get 2 sessions to put 12 and then the remaining in. And then you have a virtual allocation here. You can see there's been 17 that were allocated and 1 that's been used. So that will tell you at the end of the day what work you still have left to do. So you want to make sure that at the end of the day that this would say 17 here and the accepted category to match the virtual allocation, and that it would say 18 here to match the panel session allocation. And then of course your poster should match as well. And to create a poster session, it's simple. You'll just use this. And again, it's the same thing you would do. It is, I would say the one difference here is you want to check to make sure that the paper you've accepted is agreeable to doing a poster. And all poster sessions will be virtual this year. They were already electronic posters, so it just makes sense to keep them virtual, and we'll create some Zoom rooms for them to talk.
Ashley, I have a question about the poster sessions. Should we, given that we're unlikely to have a huge allocation, should we just name the poster session after the section?
Yep, so that's great if you do that. Generally, I think we do poster session, and then I think there's specific guidance in the handbook, but I think it's poster session and then colon and then your division title or vice versa. Sometimes you can add an extra link, like some people do emerging research. But that's up to you, however you want to name those. But we do recommend just really being sure to have your division name in there and your poster, and that it's a poster session, so that it's easy to find in the online program, and then also when we do the alphabetical listing in the print program. Again, if you want to look at what you've done with these panels, you can click view here and you can see all of that. I'm going to quickly go over reports here because I think this is even more helpful than it has been in past years, because we are looking at additional information such as the meeting environment preference. So you see you have a bunch of reports here. Mainly right now, you'll be using these submission reports. And so you can click this extended paper submitters report. This will pull all the individual papers that were submitted to you. And you'll request that report. And then you have the extended session submitters report. This will pull all session submissions for you. And then we also have a people report, which is your volunteers report that you can pull. You just select your division again. And then one that you might use once you start doing your reviews is the statistical division report. And you'll see there's a completed paper review data report and a completed session. So these will be, once you have reviews in the system, these will show you what review you've given the paper. These extended paper and session ones just give you everything. It does not give you what your review has been of that paper or session. So I'm going to refresh the screen here, and then we can open hopefully one of these reports to look at. Sometimes it takes a little while because there's a lot of data in these. But essentially with the paper submitters, you're going to see all that information we saw in the view summary. There's going to be the title, the author, their meeting environment preference. Same with the session. It's going to be the session title, the abstract, the participants, their meeting environment preference. That might be a good way if you want to kind of take a look at both the content and the environment at the same time. The reports would be helpful in doing that. And so this one's ready to download now. Let me just open up in Excel. Let me know if for some reason you can't see this screen when I open it, because I'm opening a new window. Can you all see an Excel sheet there? Or no?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So you'll see the type of submission is, the title, the abstract. A lot of this you don't need. There's an email, their names. And then here you'll find their meeting environment preference, as well as their presentation format. So this is where you're going to find if they want to be on a poster, a panel, or either. So a lot of these are panel only, you can see right here. Please excuse my dog in the background. Working from home. So that's how you can see that. You can also see that information about the poster preference by clicking the view summary here. Again, you can find that under presentation format. For example, this paper is happy to be on either a panel or an iPoster session. You just don't want to put somebody who put panel only here on a poster presentation, because they're probably going to decline when we send acceptances and rejections, and then you'll have a hole on your poster presentation. Kristen, is there anything I have missed, or does anybody have any other questions? Looks like there's more in the chat, so let me open that up. On the all virtual panel question, what if most of our submissions stated a preference for virtual? If that's the case, let me know and we can take a look at it. Virtual, again, is much easier for us to move to, but I think Kristen's recommendation of trying to fill the in-person allocations first might be a good way to move forward. Is there a way to know how many of our submissions are virtual or in-person in total? For that, I would recommend just probably pulling those two reports and doing a sort on that column. That's probably the fastest way to get just a total for that. Generally, panels have only 4 papers. We used to do 5, probably 4 or 5 years ago. That was back when we did 110-minute sessions. And we found that when we moved to 90, that doing 5 just wasn't a sufficient amount of time for each paper author to talk about their research and then get an ample amount of feedback. Even with 4, it's sometimes a struggle depending on the panel. So we don't recommend having over 4 papers per panel. Yeah, we fully recognize that that's why we're stressing so much that we try to do the content of the panel first. But I do think so going back to the data of what people have responded with so far, the majority have actually been either. So they're open to either doing in-person or virtual. It's up to you what you want to do with those. If you want to put them on in-person or virtual, they're open to both preferences, to both options. So that's probably that is the vast majority of the responses. And then when you look at in-person and virtual, it's about a 50-50 split. I think it's recently moved slightly higher in virtual. Previously, it was a little bit higher in in-person. So I think that there should be, unless for some reason the division is just completely deviating from the overall number, there should be some options to work with. But again, happy to talk about that offline if you're just not seeing the options there to make the in-person panels. So incoming submissions, yes, those are panels that are not available to you yet. Those are panels, they're not even just panels, there might be papers there too. Those are ones that are being reviewed by the first choice division. You're welcome to look through them. You can see a little summary of them by clicking view. And if you feel like there's a really good fit there for a panel you want to create, or it's a panel you want to accept if it's a panel waiting to come over, just email that planner. And they're usually more than willing to part with it. All of these panels, if they're not accepted, so I would say not all of them, but some of them will eventually come to you regardless if you've emailed the planner, because they'll flow down naturally to the second division. We are asking everybody to do, I don't have the deadlines in front of me because we just shifted them, so I don't know off the top of my head. There is a first round of review deadlines. I think it's probably early March that will ask you to have looked through all of the panel papers that you have now and make a decision on them. That way, nobody's left with not getting 2 reviews in the system. We want to make sure that every paper and panel has 2 reviews. So if somebody waits till March 23 and the deadline for panel construction is March 24, that those submissions that were transferred on the 23rd might not get the review they should have received. Going back to the questions, once they're rejected, they do and flow down. They do move. So let's say this one, division 3 is where this one originates. If it is rejected, it would automatically flow over, and it's a paper, it would flow over to your individual presentations tab. Once it's rejected, it will show up there. Sometimes you might see one that says transfer. This means another division is sending it to you. You'll see an option to accept or decline the transfer. If you accept it, you still have to do a formal review by either accepting or rejecting it. And if you decline that transfer, it will go back to whoever was trying to transfer it to you. So people who haven't responded, that's a tricky question. We've emailed them at least 2 or 3 times now asking for that. I would probably treat them as either, but you're welcome to reach out to them if you would like to. I think you should be able to see their information, if not in one of these screens here. You should be able to pull that report. You can see Casey's emails there, and email them and just ask them. Maybe sometimes we find that an inquiry coming from a division chair is a little more meaningful. In terms of the number of panels to save for the second round, that's really up to you. I think most people try to fill out most of them and leave maybe a couple open. And this is why we kind of recommend that you, if you're rejecting any that you think might work, that you write down those titles and those authors, or even this academic code here. Because if for some reason that's not accepted and you have a hole on your program, I can send it back to you. But again, we kind of leave that up to the division chairs on how they feel that best mix is in terms of. Why did the panel allocation not follow the 2020 as previously discussed? So when we switched to virtual, we made the decision to calculate off of 2019 just because 2020, we did not know how that was going to pan out, and it was a completely different, unexpected format. For 2022, we have not made that decision yet. I'll have to get back to you on that. Kristen, anything I missed or any other questions?
I don't think so. I think you covered everything.
I have another question, which is in the second round, and if we're the second division, do those get listed for panels as well, or are they only listed for individual papers and posters?
Are you referring to this incoming submissions tab?
Yeah.
Yep. So there should be panels under there too if there's a second choice. I'm just gonna look here. I think they're generally, yep, so there's a few full paper panels.
And so those would go into the
Sessions tab, yeah.
Okay.
And again, I think the big thing that's really different this time around is this process is mostly the same. We created a hybrid addendum here with a few additional instructions. You can find the addendum here. The biggest change is just making sure that if it's a virtual preference panel, that they're put in a virtual so that we schedule them virtually and then it uses your virtual allocation. If it's already a submitted panel, make sure you check the meeting preference. And then if it's virtual, you just have to be sure to change the type to the virtual equivalent. If it's in person, you can just leave that alone because it's going to take from your in-person allocation if you accept it because it's already an in-person session submission type. Any other questions? I feel like there's a lot to cover here. So I'm always thinking I'm missing something, but I do think those are the biggest flags that I want to put out there, is just making sure that your panel meeting preferences matches the panel session type, which matches then the allocation, because when I go to schedule, I'm going to be scheduling it based off of the allocation used. And so that's based off the session type. And we don't want a situation in which we have somebody who had an all virtual panel who's now scheduled in person or vice versa. So that's just kind of my biggest caveat with this new system, is just make sure to double check that. And again, there's a good way to check your work, would just be kind of looking at some of those reports we went over earlier. And at the end of the day, you should have on March 24, all zeros in your pending column, all zeros in your complete column, all your papers under individual presentations should say either rejected or accepted in session. Again, you don't want any statuses on any of your individual presentations that say just accepted. That means you've accepted the paper, but there's not a panel for it. And every paper should have a panel home that you've constructed at the end of the day.
Ashley, I have a question about chairs and discussants. If we don't have enough volunteers, what's the usual process that people follow to recruit? Do people send, messages to the section for volunteers, or does it make more sense to reach out to people individually?
So I think they've generally done a mix of that. I think if you know somebody would be a good fit, you're welcome to invite them. And then what you would do is just use that search feature for their name. I do think a lot of times people end up going to the section too, just to find some volunteers if they need to. And that section chair can be a great resource for that. Some of you are division chairs though that do not have a section, in which case you probably want to work with some of your colleagues to see if you can figure out somebody who would be a good fit for that panel. Okay. I know you'll probably have questions as you start to work through it. So if you do, you can feel free to always email us. That's what we're here for, especially over the next month. Are the sessions supposed to be complete when submitted? I have an author meets critics in which they propose critics, but those folks have not yet been asked. I mean, it's kind of up to you in those cases. We definitely can add people after the fact. The problem we run into the later you add people is that they have commitments elsewhere. We do have participation limits that I would recommend checking out. So sometimes they can be either overcommitted or they've just made their plans by summer that they're either attending or not attending. So I would try to nail that down with the original submitter, just to maybe before March 24 to make sure that these individuals have agreed to it, because we certainly don't want to be adding people to panels who did not know that they were added or did not plan on being added. And again, I'm recording all this, so this will be available, hopefully, if not end of day tomorrow or end of day today, it'll be up tomorrow morning.
When we did the previous webinar about the system, some of the past chairs had mentioned that they create their own spreadsheets outside of the system. Now that I'm seeing the system, I'm a little bit unclear about why people would do that. Do you remember like what the advantages are of having like your own spreadsheet rather than the using the system ones?
So I'm not sure if they created their own or if they were using the ones from the reports menu. Some people are just more comfortable using Excel. The thing is, if you do that work in Excel, you still have to come back into the system here and actually do the accepting and rejecting and constructing. So you're kind of creating an additional step by going through the reports first, but for some people, it's just easier to visualize, I think, in Excel than it is in the system.
And I guess if you do it on your own spreadsheet, then you have the advantage that even if you've rejected something, but then you want to come back to it, you still have a record of it where you wouldn't here, right?
Yeah, and that does happen a lot. So it's just another thing I'll stress again, is that if there are any that you are rejecting that you think you might have a space for later, should a hole open up, then just write it down. You can always make that decision later if it's still available and if you want it or not. So it is probably good to at least start with your pulling those initial reports so you have them from the beginning before you do any work, I would probably recommend doing that. Just because you can then always go back and look at what you initially had and see if there's anything you might want to see if it's still available later on. Okay, if you have any questions or think of anything else, let me know. That's what we're here for, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Again, Monday is the big deadline for elevating any panels to the theme level for review. Again, if it's an accepted session, you would just use that transfer button. If it's a created session though, just let Kristen or I know. You can email us at meeting@absonet.org and we can help you transfer that over. Just again, the system won't let you transfer a created session. So, okay, thank you all. And I'm sure we'll be in touch in the coming weeks. So have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.